Utility is the satisfaction you get from consuming something like the joy of your first slice of pizza. Marginal utility is the extra satisfaction from each additional slice, but with diminishing marginal utility, that joy decreases the more you eat. These concepts explain why we make choices and balance what we consume. In this video, we will define the concepts in more detail, and I will show you how to apply them to everyday situations.
In this module, we want to understand what's going on behind the demand curve and where it comes from. Right? We want to first use economic logic to explain the nature of demand curves. Then we want to explain the relationship between marginal utility and prices. And 3, describe the rational behavior of maximizing satisfaction. How do people, what are the goals that people have and how do they reach them? And to do this, we want to understand the concept of diminishing marginal utility. Now, for motivation of why we want to do this, when we went at the demand module, we had downward sloping demand curves, and it kind of made sense. I made the argument that as prices go up, people want to buy less of something, and if prices goes down, people want to buy more. Okay, now that was probably made sense to you, and intuitively that's good. But now we want to have much more like a formal model to understand of why the consumers might behave that way. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail into this with math. I'm just going to give you a little bit so that you can understand a little bit more of where that thinking comes from. Now, to do this, we need a couple definitions. The first one is going to be utility. Utility, for an economist, is going to be the happiness or satisfaction we get from consuming goods and services. Right, so each person has different preferences over different things. You can have a number of movies per week. We have in this example, and that's going to essentially give you some sort of happiness points or satisfaction points. Okay, and then generally, the more of a good you consume, that's going to make this utility increase, or your happiness increase, or your satisfaction increase. Right, and so what we have over here is the number of movies you consume a week, and then your total utility associated with that amount of consumption, right? So if you consume 0 movies, you have 0 utility. If you have 1 movie, you get 12 units of utility. If you watch 2 movies, you get 22, 3 movies, 31, and so on down the line as you consume more and more movies per week. Okay. Now, the units of utility are going to be called utils. And so we would read this: if I watch 1 movie per week, I will get 12 utils from watching that 1 movie. If I watch 2 movies per week, I will get in total 22 utils from watching both those movies together as a group or as a whole. Right? What are utils? They're just basically made up. Right? We just have some sort of measurement that we want theoretically of that as consumers consume more of something. What are we maximizing? And for us, it's going to be utility. Right? Utility doesn't exist. It's just a useful theoretical concept to build our models on consumer behavior. Okay, for you, you can just think of it as happiness points or satisfaction points. So, for instance, when I'm going around the world as a consumer myself, I'm thinking I'm going to buy things that are going to make me happy or increase my happiness. Right? I'm not thinking about how much utility, how many utils is this particular thing going to give me. If I go buy a coffee at Starbucks, how many extra utils will I get? I don't do that, right? And so what we're going to do is build up a model of consumer behavior with utility and utils, such that it might mimic people's actual choices in the real world. So as long as our model is going to actually fit the data of how people actually behave, then that's a good enough model. It doesn't actually have to be exactly what's going on in the real world, right? So models are going to be abstract and simplifications of the world, and our models are going to do that same thing by using these utils. All right, so this is utility. Now we have this total utility for each of these extra movies. Now we want to think about marginal utility. Marginal utility is going to be the additional happiness or satisfaction we get from consuming 1 more unit of a good or service. Right? So to find the marginal utility of the 3rd unit, we're going to difference the total utility of the 3rd and 2nd unit. So we want to know how much extra happiness we get or satisfaction we get from consuming that 3rd movie per week. And so we want to subtract off the total utility we get from watching 3, subtract off the total utility you get from watching 2. So that difference there, that step up, is the marginal or extra utility, additional happiness you get from that 3rd movie. right? So we'll get 9 extra utils from consuming that third movie, right? We got 22, now we're at 31. So that third unit gives us 9. And so we could do that differencing all along here. All right, moving from 0 to 1 will give us 12. Moving from 1 to 2 will give us an extra 10. Moving from 2 to 3 will give us an extra 9, and so on. And so we can see that this margin utility is going down, down, down. So I'm going to want you to be able to calculate these margin utilities. If I give you a table of quantities and a total utility, I want you to be able to difference that and to calculate out what these margin utilities will be. Okay. We have a definition then for this behavior of marginal utility called diminishing marginal utility. And which is, as you consume more and more of something, eventually the last unit consumed will bring you less satisfaction than the unit before. So this table here exhibits diminishing marginal utility. That first movie of the week, it gives you extra 12, the second 10, the third 9, the fourth 8, and on, as each additional movie brings you less and less and less happiness points or utils. Right? Another way to think about this is like when I eat a pizza, that first piece of pizza gives me a big boost in happiness, a big increase in utility. It tastes really, really good. It satisfies my hunger. The second piece of pizza, my utility still goes up, but not as much as that eating that first piece. And so maybe my marginal utility goes down. Third piece, my marginal utility goes down even more. It doesn't give me that as big a boost up until the point where, or maybe even it goes negative, where I've eaten too much pieces of pizza and I shouldn't be doing that, and I might have negative marginal utility where it actually causes my happiness points to go down. Okay. All right. So there's our definitions of total utility, marginal utility, and seeing this diminishing marginal utility. I've only shown you tables so far. So imagine we take this table here of all these numbers of quantity and total utility and marginal utility, and I'm going to graph those out for you so we can visualize these on a graph. So same numbers that we saw before. If we do that, we'll have a total utility, right? It's going up, 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 up. Each additional movie, our happiness units goes up, 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 up. But you can see those jumps being smaller and smaller and smaller jumps. Okay, so that smaller and smaller jumps are going to be that marginal utility, diminishing marginal utility. And so marginal utility is really going to be the change in utility. And anytime you think of marginal, if you know some calculus, that's just going to be a derivative or a slope, right? And so the slope of this total utility graph, right, that is going to give you the change, and that's going to be our marginal utility. So we can actually graph out those marginal utilities that are corresponding to 1, 2, 3, 4 movies. That's corresponding to this graph. And so here's just the slope. The height of this curve, marginal utility, is the slope at each of those points. And we can see that slope getting slower, getting lower and lower and lower. So the marginal utility of each extra movie is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Great, so there's total utility, marginal utility, and diminishing marginal utility.